We hear ya. Joe Mixon was too low on yesterday's episode, so we are here with the correct wide receiver rankings. We're going to try our hand in that today. We are going to go S tier, A tier, B tier, and C tier. Only 4 tiers wide receivers, but we're going to cover the top 20 in this one, and then we'll finish with some honorable mentions. But let's kick it off with our S tier. In our S tier, we have Ja'Marr Chase, Nico Collins, and Justin Jefferson. So, Ty, we have Ja'Marr Chase as our consensus wide receiver 1 overall. Why is that?
Just because for me, this Cincinnati team is not going away from their bread and butter, right? And when T. Higgins has played this year, Ja'Marr Chase has absolutely gone ballistic, right? Because he's being utilized in the areas of the field where he can be a threat after the catch instead of trying to be the do-it-all guy. T. Higgins is taking that part of the game in this passing game. And going into week 11, this Cincinnati team, we said this when we talked about Chase Brown yesterday, they were first in pass rate over expected, and Joe Burrow just threw the ball 50 times against the Chargers. So I'm not really expecting that to really change going into week 12. So again, for a team that is opting to throw the ball as often and as much as they are, Ja'Marr Chase, and again, based on just previous performances this year too, the dude is absolute dynamite, and I really don't care what his schedule is for the rest of the year, right? Like, he's got divisional matchups. He's getting Tennessee. He's getting Denver. It doesn't matter because Cincinnati is just wanting to throw the ball.
Yeah, he's been unreal so far. He's already had 100 targets on the season, 11 games in, already got over 1,000 yards, already has 12 receiving touchdowns. And I'm going to be honest, I don't think anything differs going on to the rest of the season. Obviously, if you look at his overall schedule, he's had, a couple games, like he had a 12.7, 11, but then he also brings in the 55, multiple games over 20, another game with 40 against, he's got 96 points on the season against Baltimore right now, which is just insane when you think about that. But the targets, last 4 games, 11, 11, 17, 13. Do we really think that's going to change? No, it's not. And like you said, the Chargers hadn't given up more than 20 points last week. Bengals come out and put up 27. I think they put up 24 in the second half. So, or now I think they had 6 in the first half. So what did that make it? 21 in the second half. So yeah, I think even with the tougher schedule, like you said, I'm not doubting Ja'Marr Chase and Joe Burrow at all. Second player in this S tier is Nico Collins. And I think some people might be surprised to see, hey, you guys got Nico Collins at number 2, just ahead of Justin Jefferson. Obviously, when we're talking tiers, right, you can order these guys, put these guys in any order. I'll say for me, Nico Collins is number 3 in this tier. Justin Jefferson is 1. But Ty, you got Ja'Marr Chase 1, Nico 2, and you actually have Jefferson 4. We'll talk about that in a sec. But, right, Nico missed a couple weeks. But why do we have this confidence again that what we saw in the beginning of the season, we're going to see again for the rest of the year?
I don't want to call it recency bias or anything like that, but literally the first play of the game, it's a deep shot to Nico Collins, and it gets called back because of an illegal man downfield, but it would have been a 77-yard touchdown, right? So you get big playability with Nico Collins, the true alpha wide receiver in this offense. There is no Stephon Diggs, right? So that's the other component to this, where there's even more work. There's even more volume in store for Nico Collins now that he's healthy. Now, he only played, let me confirm this. He only played in about like 40% of snaps, I think it was, 47% of snaps. So there were reports that he was a full go for last night. I don't think that was, if the game was closer, I think he would have been on the field more. But after that, and just how Houston dominated Dallas, they didn't need Nico to be on the field as much then. Mm-hmm. I'm expecting Nico to be full go rest of the season. Again, the week 14 bye does make things a little complicated, right? But Tennessee, Jacksonville, the bye, but then you get Miami, Kansas City, and Baltimore in the fantasy playoffs. That's points. That I don't care if that, like, Kansas City's been good. I don't care. Nico's going to put up points because Houston needs to put up points.
Yeah, dude's got a ridiculous 3.68 yards per out run right now. That's just silly. That is silly numbers. He's got his air yard share is 40% for his team right now. His target rate is 30%. I know CJ Stroud hasn't looked great, but the reason he hasn't looked great is because Nico Collins hasn't been on the field. You put him back on the field and you see games. Obviously, Dallas has been awful, but you see them put up 34 points. It's not a surprise that happened with Nico Collins back out there. I got to agree that continues to happen. Now, Justin Jefferson, this is the one I'm a little bugged at you about, Ty. You before we started, go, hey, do we need to move Jefferson out of the S tier? And I'm just wondering where's that coming from? I mean, Justin Jefferson has been the epitome of elite play week after week. Obviously, last 2 weeks, I understand he had 9.8, 14.1 last week. But that 14.1, he's tackled at the 1 yard line on a slant. That could easily be 20 points again. Before that, he was 15, 23, 20, 20, 15, 21, 19, 21. Seeing at least 8 targets every single week since week 3. So you have a little more pessimism. Obviously, he's still in your top 4, right? I'm not saying like you're dropping Jefferson way down. But what do you think is separating Jamar and Nico from Jefferson rest of the season?
Because I think Jamar and Nico are matchup proof, and Jefferson is to a certain extent, but it doesn't matter how bad Joe Burrow and CJ, and maybe that's really the point I'm trying to make. Nico has CJ Stroud and Jamar has Joe Burrow. Justin Jefferson has Sam Darnold, right? And you look at the upcoming schedule: Chicago, Arizona, Atlanta, Chicago again, then Seattle, Green Bay, and if you play in week 18, you get Detroit. It's not the most like fear striking schedule for the rest of the year, but there are opponents in here where I'm like, boy, Sam Darnold could absolutely fall flat on his face, right? Because there's too much pressure in his face or whatever the case may be. That's why I would argue to put Jefferson as the first wide receiver. Let me say that in the A tier, because I'm like, I don't have questions about Jamar and Nico versus Jefferson. I'm like, he's a bit more like he needs Darnold to play decently well in order for him to produce.
Yeah, I will agree that like that Jacksonville game made it a little more worrisome because we saw the bottom for Sam Darnold, right? I mean, we saw how bad it could be finishing as the wide receiver 32 on that week. But at the same time, I don't know. I just believe in the talent in Jefferson and Kevin O'Connell getting him open. That volume will be enough that he'll remain in that tier. All right, before we have the A tier real quick, we just want to remind you, we just passed 2,000 subs over on YouTube. We want to hit 3,000 before we end this season, right? It's a little nice little goal for us. We hope that you want to be a part of the fellowship with us. So just make sure you hit that subscribe button over on YouTube. Over on the audio podcast, we love you guys as well. Drop us a little review. Leave us a little like, whatever they have on the platform you're on. I know it's different between Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, but whatever they got over there, we love hearing from you guys. Leave us a comment what you want to see more of. But in the A tier, we have AJ Brown, Puka Nacua, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Tyreek Hill. This is an interesting tier to me because it feels like there's a lot of good going on here. It feels like, why aren't some of these guys maybe in the S tier? Why aren't some of these guys a little lower? But let's start with AJ Brown. He is an elite wide receiver. Like that is the way you can describe AJ Brown over the last 4 years. He just does it all, and he does it super well. From fantasy, the last couple of weeks, I'll admit, have been a little more disappointing. Since week 8, he's 13, 5, 15.9, and 11. Hasn't finished in the top 15 wide receivers on a week. But what gives you the confidence? You have him as your wide receiver 3. What gives you the confidence in AJ Brown rest of the season?
What gives me confidence is that there are some matchups where they are going to need AJ Brown to step up. They're not going to be able to rely on just Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley in the rushing game, right? Like the Rams could be a game where we see AJ Brown, Davante, and Saquon all, do really well. But then we get Baltimore. Saquon is still going to be a contributor on your fantasy team, but he's not going to have the 30-point breakout that we saw this past week and then he gets Pittsburgh again, or I shouldn't say again, he gets Pittsburgh, and that's just another tough matchup, right? Each of these matchups, AJ Brown is going to be involved. He's going to have some big plays. He's going to find the end zone. That's really the biggest reason why it's been a disappointment. It's because he hasn't scored in 4 straight games. Now, part of that is because they haven't needed him to. So you could also make the argument, like, do they need him to the rest of the year? I would entertain it, but I think, again, with certain matchups, AJ Brown will be called upon.
Yeah, that's the worry for me though is right now he's got a 32% target share. He's got a 48.3% air yard share. Yet he's only averaging 7 targets a game. That's the worry right now. Is they're just not throwing the ball as much. I mean, when Saquon looks the way he does and Jalen Hurts is able to score everything around the end zone, it's kind of like, why would we throw the ball if we don't have to? You know, we saw that in the Dallas game. We saw that even in the Commanders game last week. That's or not. Yeah, was it last week they played the Commanders Thursday night? And so that's what worries me a little bit is that he's not getting any red zone targets. He only has 1 on the season. Man, that comes in part from Saquon Barkley, Jalen Hurts scoring 11 rushing touchdowns so far. But that's the only reason I have him at 6 is I'm just worried that he's not going to see the volume that he needs to be that S tier, to be pushing that S tier. That's my only worry with him right now.
No, and it makes sense. I mean, you could really say that about each of these guys in the A tier, and that's probably the reason why they're not in the S tier or ranked higher in our consensus rankings, is just because, like, you don't want to call it volatility, but there could be some weeks where the bottom does kind of fall out on him. We've seen it in the past with Tyreek. We've seen it with AJ Brown. So again, that's kind of the premise of this A tier, you could say. That's the thought behind it, of just like, these guys are elite talents, but they just do not provide you the same consistency, the same floor as the guys in the S tier.
Yeah. The next guy on this tier is Puka Nacua, and he's been on a tear since he came back from injury. He had 18, and then he got ejected against Seattle. That sucks. But he had 18 in that first game against Minnesota on 57% of snaps, 18.8 against Miami, and then 25.3 this last week against New England. He's got Cooper Kupp, and Cooper Kupp has looked good. Do you think that he can maintain this? Do you think he comes down a little? Do you think this is just the beginning for Puka Nacua? What's that outlook rest of the season? Because I know he's got Philly, New Orleans, Buffalo, San Francisco, New York Jets, Arizona, Seattle, right? So it's kind of a mixed bag of matchups. You got some great ones. You got some ones you would rather stay away from. So what is your thought on Puka moving forward?
I see Puka was my wide receiver. Let's see, my wide receiver 6 in these rankings.
Mm-hmm.
And it honestly came down to, I had Amon-Ra ahead of him. I had AJ Brown ahead of him. Mm-hmm. Puka himself is not matchup proof, but this Rams offense as a whole, I don't care who they play. Mm-hmm. They will stay in my fantasy lineups because of that. For Puka, 9 and 14 and 9 targets in those really good fantasy performances since coming back from his injury. Mm-hmm. I don't know if we're going to maintain that level of volume, but the thing that gives me hope for Puka, his 11.1 ADOT, his depth of target, to Cooper Kupp's 7.7, gives me hope that Puka can come through on some big play, some big splash play opportunities that go his way that Cooper Kupp does not get. So Cooper Kupp is the volume play. Puka is the big play, kind of yards after the catch kind of guy. That gives me hope, because then the other part of this too, when Puka gets on the field, he gets targets, right? Mm-hmm. Like, that's what we've seen. He's got a 32.6% target rate. That's second of all wide receivers. Again, so that's whenever he's running around, he's getting a target. So that gives me some optimism for Puka the rest of the season.
For sure. No, that totally makes sense. I think it's, like you said, the issue is just that Cooper Kupp's out there as well. And so is there going to be a couple games down the stretch where Cooper Kupp absolutely dominates, sees 15 targets? Definitely could, because him and Stafford have that connection. But what we've seen so far from Puka has been pretty promising, and it would be very, very difficult to move him away from your lineup. I got to admit, in my family league, I've built somewhat of a super team, and I'm sitting on Justin Jefferson, Nico Collins, Amon-Ra, and Puka Nacua as my wide receivers. We're only playing 2 wide receivers, 1 flex. So I put Joe Mixon in my flex, and I had to make the decision between Amon-Ra, Puka Nacua, and Nico Collins this last week. And I went with Nico Collins. So it was it was rough because I missed out on 30 points from the other 2. But Amon-Ra St. Brown, he was a guy we talked about as maybe being the safest round 1 wide receiver, because we knew this Detroit team was going to be awesome. And we thought that it was going to run through the ground game and Amon-Ra St. Brown. But I think what we've kind of seen is they don't necessarily need Amon-Ra to put up insane amount of points. Obviously, last week they did it with him, but we've had a couple weeks from Amon-Ra where you're kind of like, they just put up 45 points and he had 8 points for, 8 points for me. Like, we've seen those disappointing weeks, but at the same time, dude's still been awesome. Other than his 8-point week and his 4-point week in week 1, he's pretty much 18 points or more every single week. So do you think, we've kind of gotten over that little bumpy stretch with Amon-Ra, or is there still that worry that the ground game just gets going and we just don't see anything out of the passing game?
I think there's with how Detroit is played, like, you do have to take into account that, like, the 47-point game against Dallas, the 52-point game against Tennessee, the 52-point game against Jacksonville, those are the worst the Tennessee defense has had their better games.
Mm-hmm.
This Detroit offense, in any given week, they can explode like they have already this year, right? Then you look at the upcoming schedule of Indy, then Chicago, Green Bay, Buffalo, Chicago, San Francisco, Minnesota. I'm not really sure if there's a game where they do have that kind of offensive explosion where his floor is a lot lower than where it normally is.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, it can happen to anybody. You do not know, right? Like, I shouldn't say you don't know, because I think you could have said, like, oh yeah, the Dallas and Jacksonville matchups, like, they would dominate. And sure enough, they did, right? But I don't think the rest of the year, any of these teams necessarily are going to, like, lay an egg when it comes to their matchup against Detroit. So I think Amon-Ra is going to be fine. I think we're past the rough patch, but you do have to at least acknowledge that, like, it's within the realm of possibilities here.
Yeah, I think really the only worry, like you said, I think he's past that patch. I think that they're playing in competitive games now moving forward. He is like I said, they don't need him, but he's still a staple of this offense, right? He's still the best offensive weapon, probably outside of him and Jahmyr Gibbs. I think you could go either way. Who's the best offensive weapon? But they still need him. But the only worry would be Jared Goff doesn't cook the way he has been, because he has been unreal, especially efficiency wise. I mean, you just look at Amon-Ra. Last game, 11 targets, 11 receptions. Game before, 8 targets, 6 receptions. 7 targets, 7 receptions. 2 targets, 2 receptions. 8 targets, 8 receptions. 4 targets, 4 receptions. 6 targets, 6 receptions. I'm going to just tell you right now, it is not normal that, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the last 7 weeks, a wide receiver catches every single one of their targets. The fact that over the last 7 weeks, Amon-Ra has only missed 2 targets, has only not got 2. That's insane efficiency. If any team's going to keep it up right now, it is Detroit, but that is something to keep an eye on. That would be the only issue I could foresee for him moving forward. And the final guy on this list, little mini voice crack there. Final guy on this list. Hey, I'm getting over being sick. I'm going to blame it on that. But it is Tyreek Hill. And I think he's kind of the odd guy out a little bit on this tier, just because what we've seen in the beginning of the season has not exactly been up to Tyreek Hill standards, right? We finally saw 19 points from last week on 8 targets, but before that, he hadn't finished in the top 24 wide receivers since week 1. He had only finished inside the top 30 once. He had finished outside the top 50 4 times during that stretch. That is not what we expected from Tyreek. Obviously, Tua missing had a lot to do with it. So what is kind of giving us this confidence that Miami's back, that Tyreek Hill is back, even though he is playing through a torn ligament in his wrist?
For me, it came in week 11 against the Raiders. Tyreek was utilized differently than in weeks past, right? Tyreek, we think of this huge vertical threat, which he is when he's healthy, right? It was reported before Monday Night Football against the Chargers that he's dealing with a torn ligament in his wrist. And again, that was week 10. So week 11, right? First game since that report came out. Tyreek Hill was not utilized vertically as much, and it was all horizontal. It was all going across the field. So my hope is for the rest of the year, regardless of who they play, right? You get the Patriots, Green Bay, the Jets, Houston, San Francisco, Cleveland, and then the Jets in week 18. It's putting him in spots, in spaces in the field where he can just use his speed to beat defenders, right? And that's what happened against Vegas. Again, he finished 61 yards and a touchdown on 7 catches. So it's not the insane ceiling that you would hope for from a guy like Tyreek Hill. But if he's going to be kind of put into this role again, where use your speed to go beat people, I think we could see similar performances to what we saw against Vegas. So this may be the most like projecting ranking that we have of any of these wide receivers. That being said, I've got some faith. I think I have faith in this Miami offense. Again, putting him in these spots and situations to just go fast.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, he is Tyreek Hill. He is the guy who's had double-digit touchdowns and 1,700 yards his first 2 years in Miami. So I don't think that just disappeared, right? I think that's still there. I think that this offense is just getting going again, right? They missed a step. They were in kind of panic mode. And so I think for Tyreek Hill rest of the season, it's just kind of finding that rhythm again. And I trust in this offense and I trust in Tyreek Hill to do that. So I agree. I think it's definitely projecting, but it's because we understand how talented he is and what kind of offense that he's in, that, you know, he's going to be just fine moving forward, returning to kind of that elite tier once again. All righty, before we get on to the B and C tier, along with our honorable mentions, let's hear a word from our friends over at Underdog Fantasy.
Today's podcast episode is brought to you by our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Now, we love Underdog. It is the easiest place to play best ball formats, and they even have their own form of player props called Pick'em. You can make up to 20 times your money on a single night by correlating props together. 2 picks will triple your money, 3 will 6 times it, 4 will 10 times it, and 5 plays that all hit will multiply your entry by 20. You can even place insurance on your picks too, so if only 4 of your 5 props hit, you still get 10 times your entry. And if you use our code FELLAS when signing up, Underdog is going to double your first deposit up to $100.
We are back and we got the B tier. And in our B tier, we have Drake London, Cooper Kupp, CeeDee Lamb, Malik Neighbors, T. Higgins, and George Pickens. And I got to be honest, it feels weird having CeeDee Lamb in here. But it's obviously the Cooper Rush effect. We'll talk about that in a sec. It just feels kind of gross saying his name, you know, not among the top tier wide receivers. But let's start with Drake London. Wide receiver 8 for us across the board. He is the beginning of this tier for all of us. I think we all kind of felt like he didn't quite belong in that A tier, but he was kind of the next best wide receiver. He has the bye week in week 12. Then he's got the Chargers, Minnesota, Vegas, Giants, Washington, Carolina. So a pretty favorable schedule down the stretch. What do you think the range of outcomes are for Drake London moving forward? Like, does he have top 5 potential, or is he going to be kind of this low-end wide receiver 1?
Personally, I think it's a low-end wide receiver 1 because I think this Atlanta offense, the rest of the year, right, against the Chargers in Minnesota, Drake could definitely have his best games or the best games for the rest of the year against those teams. But it's kind of what we talked about with Bijan in the last ranking episode. Vegas, Giants, and Washington in the fantasy playoffs, those are Bijan games, right? And that's not to say that like Drake London can't still make something happen in those games. I just don't think he's just not going to be called upon enough in those games to really make a top 5 push the rest of the season or to kind of catapult himself into the A tier. I think there's an argument kind of based on, you know, the first half of the season before their bye week that he could be an A tier wide receiver. I think, again, just rest of the year, kind of looking at just how this Atlanta team has performed recently, specifically looking at Drake London, I do want to add that caveat here. 7.4, 10.7, 17.7, and 9.1. So in 3 of his last 4 games, he hasn't scored more than 11 fantasy points. So I think most of these games, the rest of the way, it's going to be a heavy run game. I don't want to say run game, but I think we're going to see better performances from a teammate like Bijan Robinson than we are going to from Drake London.
Yeah, and I think the worry with London is when we look at the rest of these wide receivers, except for Tyreek, because we talked about his situation. we look at them, we rarely see games under 8 targets, right? They see great volume. You look at Drake London, he's got a game with 3, 7, 6, 2, 7 targets on the season. Now the game with 2, right? He only played 19% of snaps, so we can kind of throw that one out. But still, the point stands. He's seen games with 12, 13 targets, but he also has those games where, like you said, they're Bijan games. They're games where this team is just okay giving Bijan 25 touches and just letting him cook. We've also seen kind of an emergence from Darnell Mooney as the wide receiver 2. Kyle Pitts, as much of a headache as he has been for fantasy, right? He's still relevant in this offense. There is just a lot of weapons, and I don't know if Drake London's separated himself enough to be, that Justin Jefferson in this offense. We're like, Justin Jefferson's got Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, Aaron Jones around him. But at the same time, Justin Jefferson is different enough, special enough that he's head and shoulders ahead of these guys, where I think Drake London is probably behind Bijan as their best weapon. I just don't know if it's like we have to target Drake London in every situation to get him the ball. So I think that's kind of the reason that we don't see the same amount of volume, but at the same time, he's been very good for fantasy football this year. I think obviously we all have him as a wide receiver 8. We think that continues. It's just, I don't think we see 20 points a week from him the rest of the season to kind of catapult him into that next year. I think that's just kind of where it stands. Next guy on our list is Cooper Kupp. We kind of talked about him with Puka, right? It's kind of the same issue. If Cooper Kupp is by himself, he's probably in that tier above. Puka is it by himself, he's probably in that S tier, right? They're still both great for fantasy at the same time, but when you have 2 volume hogs on the same team, right? There's only so high you can go with that. We talked about his schedule with Philly, New Orleans, Buffalo, San Francisco, Giants, Arizona, Seattle. So kind of a mixed bag. Do you think there's any chance anymore that Cooper Kupp overtakes Puka as the wide receiver 1 in this offense? Or is it firmly Puka and that limits Cooper Kupp to kind of this same range as Drake London?
So I do want to just clarify wide receiver 1 in terms of fantasy production, not necessarily talking about like who's like the best looking wide receiver on the Rams or anything like that. I think Puka has the higher ceiling week to week than Cooper Kupp. But that being said, Cooper Kupp has the better floor compared to Puka Nacua, just because again, Cooper Kupp is just the target hog. And I don't even know if you can necessarily call him the target hog because Puka can still get his in this offense. But like this offense is set up in a way where both of these wide receivers can thrive. But the stat of the depth of target for these wide receivers, where Puka is in double digits and Cooper Kupp is below 8 yards, there is definitely we are wanting Cooper Kupp to get open near the line of scrimmage just to get the ball out of Stafford's hands quick, so we don't need to just wait for routes to develop, right? So I think again, Puka is probably the wide receiver 1 in the Rams in terms of fantasy production the rest of the year, just because of the big playability that he can have while still getting a decent amount of targets. That's not an anti-Cooper Kupp take in the slightest, right? Like Cooper Kupp will still get his 8, 14, 7, and 10 targets in his last 4, no lower than 15 fantasy points in a game in those last 4 games, right? So it's a matter of like kind of a pick your poison kind of thing. And we're at the point in the season where you're like, we're not choosing who we're going to have the rest of the season. Both guys are going to be very good. But again, just based on weekly ceiling, I will say Puka wide receiver 1.
No, and I agree with that. I think the only thing Cooper Kupp has going for him is I think he's the higher priority red zone target for Matthew Stafford. I think he's going to end up with more touchdowns than Puka at the end of the year. But like you said, I mean, you can't argue with 9, 14, and 9 and Puka's, targets and Puka's 3 full games. Like that's hard to argue with for sure. So I see Cooper Kupp very similar to that. These next 2 guys, CeeDee Lamb, Malik Neighbors, I want to talk about them together because I think their situations are similar enough, right? I'm not saying Malik Neighbors has reached the CeeDee Lamb tier yet, right? I'm still saying CeeDee Lamb is better, but we've seen Malik Neighbors show, hey, I'm going to be an elite wide receiver for quite a few years to come. I'm going to be in that conversation with CeeDee Lamb very soon, right? I don't think there's any doubt in that. However, the starting quarterbacks are Cooper Rush and Tommy DeVito. The defenses suck. I mean, there's no way getting around it. So you look at these two guys, me and you both were like, I can't in good conscience have Malik Neighbors with Tommy DeVito ranked ahead of CeeDee Lamb. So we both went and switched it real quick, right? And put CeeDee Lamb one spot higher. As far as the ceilings for these two guys, is there any hope that we can get that top 5 ceiling that we were hoping with the backups? Or are they both kind of, they're going to be good, but we're also just going to have these deep valleys with the two of them?
I think the biggest reason why like the ceilings just won't be there the rest of the season is just because I'm not expecting these offenses to put up a ton of points in their games.
Yep.
So if they do score, it's because it's a 50-yard busted coverage kind of score, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which can happen to any receiver. I'm not going to sit here and be like, you know what? Like it's definitely possible. Mm-hmm. No chance. I think there's an even stronger argument now. Teams may put special extra attention on a CeeDee Lamb, on a Malik Neighbors, bracket coverage with a linebacker, safety over the top, whatever it may be on these guys, because with the backup quarterback, we're going to take away your best weapon. And now you got to beat us with a Wan'Dale Robinson. You got to beat us with a Jalen Tolbert. You got to beat us with somebody else, right? Mm-hmm. So both of these guys can be volume plays to a certain extent. The ceilings are just going to take a massive hit because of their quarterback situations.
Yeah. And that, I mean, we've seen that, even last night. CeeDee Lamb, 8 catches on 12 targets, 93 yards, but he doesn't score. And so he's still the wide receiver 14 on the week. 18.6. You're very happy with that if you started CeeDee Lamb. But that feels like the ceiling. It feels like it's going to be very few and far between for both of them. CeeDee Lamb, last 5 games, 10+ targets. Malik Neighbors, 6 of his last 7, 10+ targets. I think that continues for both of them. But like we saw for CeeDee Lamb against Philly, 6 receptions on 10 targets for 21 yards. Right? That is disgusting. It's gross. And that is the floor that you're going to have with these two guys rest of the season. And it feels like what we saw from CeeDee, the stat line I just read off against Houston, is probably the ceiling. It doesn't feel like you're going to see the 39-point week from CeeDee anymore, where he can put up 13 catches, 150 yards, and 2 touchdowns. That's just not going to happen with these two with Cooper Rush and Tommy DeVito at the helm. So that's why they're in this tier. They're good enough, going to see the volume to be here. They're just not going to have the upside to kind of move them into those higher tiers.
No, I mean, real quick. Dallas made it into the red zone once.
Yep.
Against Houston. That is very realistic for both of these teams, that you're only going to get one opportunity where you're going to be close enough to the goal line to make something happen.
Yep.
So it's just not exciting the rest of the year.
No, it's definitely not. It's going to be gross, but it'll be good enough where you can still start them. That's where I'm assuming they're at. And you know what? We could even be wrong on that. So they could continue to move down your list. This next guy I know you're excited about. I know you're happy he's here. It's T. Higgins. Yeah, I know this is the one that you've been wanting to pat yourself on the back for. This was a great call. Dude has looked electric when he's been on the field. If you didn't know that he was in a contract year, you do now, because he is making sure that everybody knows what he is worth on that field. Like, obviously the same as Chase, but has the bye week 12, then Pittsburgh, Dallas, Tennessee, Cleveland, Denver. So not the greatest rest of the season schedule, but man, is it hard to argue with what he has done on the field. Wow, Fantasy Pros has him all the way down at wide receiver 19 rest of the season. That's nuts to me. But when he's been on the field, we've seen 10, 14, 7, 8, 13 targets. That equates to 12, 29, 14, 18, and 29 fantasy points. I got to be honest. I don't see that not continuing for him rest of the season. I see him just continuing to go out and just absolutely ball. Do you see anything else? Any other outcome from T. Higgins?
Nope, I don't. I mean, we're talking about the wide receiver 6 in points per game this year.
Yeah.
Like, I think the biggest question will be, can he stay healthy? Which I think has always been the question with T. Higgins.
Yeah.
But missing 3 games, then coming back against the Chargers, and not only finishing with 13 targets, but playing on how many snaps? What was this? 84% of snaps?
Yeah.
He's good.
Back and dominates. Yep.
Yeah, he's good. Yeah, like no reason to doubt T. Higgins the rest of the year.
And that's what we talked about with Chase too. Joe Burrow's playing on that Joe Burrow level when they went to the Super Bowl. That's the level he's playing right now, which is crazy that they're a 4-7 team. that is pretty wild. But yeah, I really don't have much reason to doubt unless something crazy happens, obviously with like the contract where we have a hold-in situation or something like that, which I don't think is going to happen. Obviously, we don't project that happening, but I feel like that's the only thing that could derail T. Higgins rest of the season or an injury, as you said. The last guy in this tier, you know what? I'm surprised. I'm shocked he's here, but he is. He deserves to be. He's been great from fantasy. It's George Pickens. He's got Cleveland, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Kansas City, Cincinnati coming up. And you know what? We used to hear, hey, he's got 4 divisional matchups in the AFC North. Yeah, you don't want anything to do with that. That's not the case this year. You can throw against everyone who's not Pittsburgh in the AFC North. They have not been good against the pass. And this dude's been good with Russ in the lineup, and that feels surprising as well. But let me see. I got the stat right here. Wide receiver 9 in points per game since Russ took over. Wide receiver 9. Ty, I know George Pickens is a little bit of a character. I know he's kind of all over the place sometimes. That stability maybe is not the best way to describe him. But what's your confidence level on George Pickens rest of the year?
Enough to put him into this B tier, and like arguably, like as crazy as it sounds, my rankings may not show it, but like I kind of like Pickens more than CeeDee Lamb and Malik Neighbors. It's crazy because like at least with Pickens I get a ceiling.
Yeah,
right.
That would be the difference.
Now there is enough risk there to, again, why I have Pickens as my wide receiver 13 and still has CD and Malik Neighbors ahead of him, because there are divisional opponents ahead. Mm-hmm. We don't know if it's going to continue, right? Like that's the thing. It feels like Pittsburgh can just kind of revert back to the ground and pound and defensive style of Pittsburgh ball that we all know. But the dude is wide receiver 16 in usage, right? Since Russ has taken over. So wide receiver 13 in our consensus rankings is pretty on par for that. And again, with his ceiling week to week, I mean, he has to be here. He has to be in this B tier.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the issue is he's the only wide receiver in Pittsburgh. So that you can't take him up because he's all they got. You can say, it's an Arthur Smith offense. They're going to ground and pound. I mean, Russ has got to throw to someone. Mm-hmm. And 9 times out of 10, if he's got to choose between Calvin Austin and George Pickens, he's going to pick George Pickens. So you just can't move him any lower. That's for sure. All right, for our C tier, just a reminder, we got our Discord. We got over 4,000 people in there. We're answering questions all the time, right? They got start sit stuff going, props, waiver wire ads. Trades are kind of dying down, but as the season dies down, Dynasty starts to pick up. And so that will pick up over there. So make sure you go join us over there. In our C tier, Garrett Wilson, DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel, Mike Evans, Marvin Harrison, Terry McLaurin, and Zay Flowers. This is definitely our biggest tier, and this kind of feels like the tier of these guys are going to be pretty good, but I have no idea what the rest of the season looks like for them. It feels like a crapshoot. Mm-hmm. For every wide receiver pass, pretty much George Pickens, which is wild to say. But we'll start with Garrett Wilson, right? He's got the bye in week 12. Then he's got Seattle, Miami, Jacksonville, the Rams, Buffalo, Miami. Not a bad schedule rest of the season. The issue is his team is a dumpster fire. and how much longer is Aaron Rodgers putting 100% into this team before he goes, my coach, my GM are gone. We're out of playoff contention. I'm 41 years old. I don't care anymore. That I guess that's the worry with Garrett Wilson. But I guess what's the upside with Garrett Wilson rest of the year?
I mean, shoot, I don't know. It's kind of similar to what we talked about with Brees, where like you just have no idea what Jets team you're going to get every single week.
Yeah.
And boy, like Garrett Wilson has continued to see the targets, which is a good thing since Davante Adams got traded to the Jets. But in the last 2 weeks, we've seen the floor. Yeah. Right. 9.1 and 5.8. That's our floor, right? He had the 2 touchdown game against Houston. That's not going to happen every single week. So I'm not going to sit here and say that that's his ceiling. Yeah. His ceiling is maybe 15 fantasy points, and that's usually kind of like wide receiver 2 range.
Yeah.
So being, having him at wide receiver 14, I kind of am like, I really don't know how I feel about it. I guess there's an argument that he should be lower. Like Lucas has him as his wide receiver 18. I hear him loud and clear.
Yeah.
And I hear us at wide receiver 13, wide receiver 14 loud and clear as well. Like there's just no good spot for Garrett Wilson. And I think you and I just say like, hey, maybe there's still some spike weeks along the way.
100%. And that's why he's in this tier though. Could you move him to 20 and I wouldn't be upset? Yeah,
absolutely.
And that's the issue with this tier. That's what I said is this is just kind of a jumbled mess. And I think, if we went past 20 wide receivers, we're going to talk about some of these honorable mentions. I don't hate if you throw them in there either, right? I think this is just a huge tier after the top 12, 13 wide receivers where it's just wide open. Speaking of a guy it's kind of wide open with, DK Metcalf. Been very good this season, right? He's looked good when he's on the field. Had 7 catches, 70 yards last week. Obviously seen the floor a couple times on a very pass-happy Seattle offense. Feels weird to say that after the Pete Carroll era, but throwing the ball more than any other team right now. JSN obviously has emerged over these last 2 games. We'll talk about him a little bit in honorable mentions, but don't know if that stays for sure. But DK, what do you think of DK? Like, is he the one guy that you like? Because that's kind of where I'm at. I kind of think that maybe he is the one guy who could move up into that next year, who could kind of crawl his way up into the B tier. Do you see him in the same way, or you're like, nah, he belongs in this kind of mess of wide receivers here?
I think it's right here because I really see all of these receivers as guys that do have the potential to absolutely dominate in 1 week and then just give you nothing the very next week, right? So in my rankings, right, just full transparency, DK Metcalf consensus wide receiver 15. He's my wide receiver 18. I have JSN as my wide receiver 19.
Ooh.
Because I think there is a change happening in this Seattle offense where we are going to see more JSN and DK Metcalf not being the ultra big play guy that we had been seeing through the first, 7 games of the season before he got hurt. So maybe I'm being too harsh and maybe I'm playing too much, or putting too much JSN into my ranking with DK. But I do worry though that like this borderline top 12 ceiling that we thought, or I shouldn't say top 12 ceiling, the top 12 finish potential that he had, I don't know if it's there anymore.
Maybe I should be moving over, looking at our Dynasty League quick to send a little offer over your way with Mr. JSN, because I thought I was high on JSN, but wide receiver.
Well, no,
19,
hold on. No. You can't be. No, you can't be saying that when you send me Jerry Jeudy and JSN for Bijan Robinson.
Hey, that was just to get a laugh before your last episode.
Sure it was.
I was sick. I was just trying to give you a laugh.
It was the NyQuil brain, is what you're saying.
100%. 100%. After DK, we have Deebo Samuel. He's been disappointing. Well, let's just be honest about it. He has. Both Brandon Ayuk was disappointing before he got hurt. Looking at these rankings, I got him at 19. You're at 17. Lucas is kind of the one keeping him up here a little bit. Got him at 15. Ty, Deebo, like, is he gonna figure it out? What's the confidence that at the end of the year, we're going to be, hey, Deebo belongs in this tier? Like, for me, it's waning a little bit. Like, I need to see it. I need to see it this week against Green Bay or next week against Buffalo. Because if I don't see it in the next 2 weeks, it's borderline. Do I even start Deebo Samuel? Like, I feel like that's silly to say, but I'm looking at these game logs and it's 10, 3, 20. He had 0 against Kansas City, but he only played 6% of snaps. 12, 12, 6. He's got 1 top 20 finish since week 4. 1 top 40 finish since week 4. Or no, 2 top 40 finishes since week 4. What's the confidence level? Like, do you trust Deebo moving forward?
Oh man, this makes me want to go back through my rankings real quick because gosh, I can't believe I'm going to say this. Maybe I shouldn't. Maybe the best way to say it is this. Deebo Samuel right now on the year is the wide receiver 40 in points per game. he has not been performing to the level of starting him in your fantasy lineups.
Yeah.
There's another guy on his team by the name of Juwan Johnson. Okay. No, Juwan Jennings. Sorry. Juwan Johnson. Is that a basketball player? Maybe it is. Who knows? But Juwan Jennings, wide receiver 13 in fantasy points per game.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to use that as like, well, you need to be playing Juwan Johnson or he's the more valuable asset right now. But I did it again. Okay. The other receiver in the San Francisco offense,
His
not
new name
named
is
Deebo
Juwan
Samuel.
Johnson.
It is new.
We've
Put it on a
renamed him.
t-shirt now. Maybe we can sell that online, maybe. Who
There
knows?
you go.
But 11 targets in back-to-back games,
Yeah.
over 90 yards for Jennings. I mean, oh boy. Again, like I said, like this makes me want to go back through my rankings because maybe I've got this flip-flopped.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been weird. I mean, like Christian McCaffrey, the last 2 games, 13 fantasy points each game. This San Francisco team needs a spark, though. They do. So maybe they try and find it with Deebo. We still trust Kyle Shanahan to get the offense moving. We don't trust him from a fantasy perspective. We trust him to get the offense moving. We don't trust individual players week to week. Oh, do you not trust him even for that anymore?
No, I just have a question.
Yes.
What is the one thing that has hurt Deebo Samuel forever?
Route running.
Well, whoa, geez. His injuries.
Yeah.
He missed week 3 with an injury.
No.
Then he was, he was back to a full snap, snap shares. But then he only played 4 snaps in week 7 because he got hurt.
Well, he's sick.
Is he healthy?
Yeah,
No. Well,
sick.
yeah, he was sick.
Pneumonia.
He was sick, but like.
But yeah, no, that's 100%.
Duh.
Like he could, he could still be fighting off that. He could have. He's always got a nagging injury. So no, I 100% agree. It's like, where is Deebo fully
I don't
at?
even know why I thought that he was hurt. Like that was like the huge storyline that he had.
No, but at the same time, like it's not out of the realm of possibilities for Deebo Samuel. Next we got Mike Evans. I think part of this is contingent on Mike Evans. It's contingent on, does he come back fully healthy? Because Baker's been cooking. And he's the only wide receiver then that Baker's going to trust. That's what it comes down to. If he's healthy rest of the season, Giants, Carolina, Vegas, Chargers, Dallas, Carolina, New Orleans. Bucs still have a shot in this AFC South. So they're going to put it all on the line, right? They're 2 games back of Atlanta. So, I mean, obviously not in the driver's seat, but they got a shot. Like they're not out of it. So they're going to put their best foot forward. So I think Mike Evans has a chance to be the best player in this tier. But that's just kind of where I'm at with that. Then these next 3 players, we got Marvin Harrison, Terry McLaurin, Zay Flowers. Out of these 3, I want you to pick one for me. Who do you prefer rest of season?
Shoot, good question. Because I think the easy answer to most people would be Terry. The Washington offense seems to be slowing down just a little bit over the last couple of weeks. And that's not to say like we need to be like full blown panic about all the players on this Washington offense. But like, if let's say this Washington offense continues to not perform like they were earlier in the season, Terry is not as much of a like top 15 lock as we thought he was. So in some weird way, I'll order it like this. Right now it's Terry, Flowers, and Marv. I would not be surprised, though, by season's end if I would go back to this question and be like, I would much prefer Zay Flowers just because I know that Baltimore is going to need to put up points the rest of the year in their matchups.
Yeah. My only thing for Marv coming off the bye, that's the hope, right? Is they can kind of turn it around there. We know the skill, but I agree. I think you have to have Terry first. I'm going to put Marv second, then Zay Flowers third. But that is the way that I have them. And let's wrap up with some honorable mentions. The 4 guys who just missed. You already mentioned one, Jackson Smith and Jigba. Had him a little further down. Lucas kind of weighed him down for the 3 of us. Jayden Reed, Devonta Smith, and Davante Adams. If you had to pick one of these 4 guys to, hop into either the C or even the B tier, which one of these 4 guys do you think kind of makes that jump?
I would personally go with Davante just because I'm wanting to just bet on the best offense of the 4 guys. I think there is some merit in saying like JSN just based on recent performances that, again, based on what we had talked about with DK about a little bit of a change in this Seattle offense and getting JSN the ball more. you could say JSN. You could also say Jaden Reed. We've talked about Jaden Reed, though, as a guy that is just the biggest, or I should say, arguably the biggest boom bust player in all of fantasy football, because he's not on the field nearly enough to be, to give you consistency. And then his targets, sure, he continues to kind of stay steady with the targets, but since he's utilized so much downfield, it's so inconsistent for me. So I would say Davante, then JSN. You could ask me tomorrow, I might say JSN and Davante, but I would say it's those two guys over Jaden Reed and Davante.
Yeah, I think my issue with Jaden Reed, 3 games this whole season with over 4 receptions. That's it. That's not good. It's not what we want to see from a guy that you're banking on finishing top 20. I think it's Jackson Smith and Jigba, and I think the reason is this offense throws the ball so much. I do agree that Devonta Smith, best offense, right? I think that they're probably going to score more points, but it just worries me how little they've thrown the ball as a team. Davante Adams, we talk about with Garrett Wilson. I just don't want, if I can avoid it, to try and figure out the puzzle that is the New York Jets, which on my dynasty team, I'm holding on Davante Adams and Breece Hall. So I'm right in the middle of it. So I understand if you are as well. But I'm going to trust in JSN. And, the schedule is pretty decent for the rest of the, Arizona twice, Minnesota, obviously Jets, Green Bay, Chicago's not awesome, but I'm going to trust in the fact that they throw the ball almost as much as, or almost more than anybody else right now. So that is who I believe in. Well, that wraps up our 20 wide receivers. Hopefully you guys aren't upset with us as you are about our 20 running backs.
No chance of that happening. You guys love our rankings.
We are, the running backs, by the time we're recording this, has been posted for 2.5 hours, Ty. As of right now, there are over 25 comments, on that video, and all of them are upset about where we have Joe Mixon, Kyron, Breece, and Christian McCaffrey. So hopefully on this one, you're a little more happy with us. That's all right. We stand by our rankings. We've put in the work, and we understand that Joe Mixon did score 3 touchdowns after we recorded that one. So we do want to throw that out there. But we thank you for listening. We got starts and sits coming tomorrow. Tyler is abandoning ship on us. He will not be there tomorrow. But that's all right. Me and Lucas will hold down the fort. We'll be back next week with 3 more episodes. We got a short form content coming out every single day. If you want short form content, TikTok, Fantasy Football Fellas. Facebook is also Fantasy Football Fellas. The FFL is on Instagram. Fantasy Football Shorts on YouTube. If you want our Twitter, FFL is over on the X. I'm at CamLawFFF on the X, and Tyler's at Tyler_Plath. And then make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, Fantasy Football Fellas on YouTube. Well, we want to thank you for watching. Thank you for joining us again, and we will see you tomorrow. Deuces.
Deuces.